Okay. Okay, Haribo, is there anything you'd like to share before we take the questions?
Well, how many questions do we have?
There's five.
5 questions. Okay.
Mhm.
I just got an email from Sumati asking that I say something about Vrindavana Dasa Thakura because it's his appearance day today. So I don't know how to factor that into the
That
questions.
was
I guess.
the first question because Sumati told me that
Well,
she emailed you. So that's answering the first question.
all right. I can say a little bit about His Holiness to start with. She asked if I could read something from my book, and I don't think I've written about him too much per se. I cited him. This is the book I'm working on called Circle of Friends, which is about sakhya-bhava, and of course, Vrindavana Dasa Thakura is associated with that transcendental sentiment. I was saying that I've written some things, quoted some things, translated some things that he said in Caitanya-Bhagavata, but and a couple of things about him. But at any rate, I'll pull it up here. There's a couple of quotes that were a couple of things he said were very endearing and were very, to me, bring out in one sense, the importance of his book, Caitanya-Bhagavata. So we'll get to that. But I believe he was born in a few years after the turn of the 14th century, maybe about 15 in our time, our secular calendar, 1505, 1507, something like that. So at the time of his birth coincided with pretty much the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu leaving Navadvip for Jagannath Puri. And as a result, he never got a chance to meet him personally. Of course, Nityananda Prabhu went with him to Jagannath Puri, but he returned annually. And at one point, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told him not to return to Puri, as he had been doing annually, but to remain in Bengal and circulate amongst the people there and share the wealth that is the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Vrindavan Das had ample opportunity. The point is to meet with Nityananda Prabhu, who he's thought to be the last direct disciple of. His parentage is of interest to us. He was the son of Narayani, who was the nephew of Srivas Thakur. And she was living in a house of Srivas Thakur and is famous for being favored and blessed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at an early age, who showered her with his blessings. And I think we talked about this on the Chaturdasi of Bhagavan Narasimhadev, and how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Srivasa's house and revealed himself to be one with the Nrsimha deity that he was worshiping, and then asked Vrindavan Das or Srivas to bring those relatives, all of them living in the house. Among them was the niece of Srivas Thakur, Narayani Devi. For some reason, she was living there. And he caused her to weep and to chant Krishna Nam and so forth with his power, spiritual power, which he was revealing to Srivas to let him know that he had nothing to fear with regard to both the Hindus and the Muslims who were complaining about his kirtan, Sankirtan that he was hosting. But at any rate, the Vrindavana Dasa is the son of Narayani Devi, and there is some limited, at best, history of her husband, which brings him into question in some way, in the same that I want to say can be thought to have some parallel with the mother of Vyasadeva, who was the author, compiler of the Bhagavatam, of course, and Vrindavan Das thought to be the extended author of the Bhagavad in the form of Caitanya-Bhagavata, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu being non-different from Krishna, and his Leela being an extension of Krishna Leela, kind of the encore of Krishna Leela. And of course, Vyas wrote it at the mouth of the Ganga, and Vrindavan Das is writing the Chaitanya Bhagavata, where it culminates and flows into the Bay of Bengal. So he's considered the Vyas of Gaur Leela. His book was named Caitanya-Bhagavata. Some say that upon reading Lochan Das's Chaitanya Mangal, another biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Vrindavan Das was so moved that he deferred to Lochan Das, and changed the name of his book, which was originally entitled Chaitanya Mangal, to Chaitanya Bhagavata. But that is a questionable event, because by the time that Caitanya-caritamrta was written, which was a quarter of a century or so after the passing of Vrindavan Das, Caitanya Krishnadas Kaviraj, the author of Caitanya-caritamrta, still referred to Chaitanya Bhagavata as Chaitanya Mangal. So from that, it would seem that his book's name was changed later to Chaitanya Bhagavata by any number of devotees like Krishnadas Kaviraj that so much celebrated his early work, Chaitanya Bhagavata, which was written in about 1535, which would mean he wrote it when he was about 25, 26, 27, 28, something like that, as a very young man. Quite an extraordinary accomplishment and contribution that carried the devotees for many, many years as the principal text that described the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the context of a Leela narrative. It was being relished by the Vrindavan Goswamis and so forth in their time. And again, Caitanya-caritamrta came afterwards. And the celebrated author Krishnadas Kaviraj of Caitanya-caritamrta defers repeatedly to Vrindavan Das's work, which deals largely with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and even more so with Nityananda Prabhu, whom he was, as I say, a disciple of, and whom he says in his heart told him to write the Chaitanya Bhagavata. But at any rate, both in dealing with descriptions of Nityananda Prabhu's Leela and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the emphasis there in Vrindavan Das's book is in Navadvip, in the Navadvip Leela of Gaur Nityananda, rather than the Madhya Leela as it's described in Caitanya-caritamrta of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Puri, and his Auntie Leela there as well, which is the former of which, the Madhya Leela, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's preaching and Sankirtan in Puri and his travels throughout India are the main focus, by contrast, of Caitanya-caritamrta. And given that our ideal, the ideal posited by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, with his emphasis on the Madhya Lila as the way, the means, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was practically showing by example his method of Sankirtan, and he's preaching and explaining the teachings and so forth. This is the way, if you will, to enter into the, to attain the goal, which is, with regard to Gaur Lila, to enter into Navadvip, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not a sannyasi, but he's a householder and known by the names Vishwambar and Nimai Pandit and so forth, names that don't carry with them Aishvarya, but rather intimacy. And that Navadvip, of course, is now different from Vrindavan. So that being the focus of Vrindavan Dasa's work, I think is one of the reasons that Krishnadas Kaviraj defers to him. He's a predecessor, of course, also from a practical point of view. Obviously, Krishnadas was drawn from his book, as he says he has, and he just touched on some things in the Adi Lila that weren't elaborated upon by Vrindavan Das. But that focus in Navadvip of Vrindavan Das, again, is what the Madhya Lila focus of Caitanya-caritamrta is meant to bring us to with regard to Gaur Lila. So, a very important work. He's identified, as I said earlier, with Vyas, the Vyas of Gaur Lila, and with Kushamapita, who is one of the famous friends of Krishna, mentioned, for example, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and some other texts. Kushamapita is one of the sakhas of Krishna. There are four basic types of friends of Krishna, the first of which are the sakhas, who tend to be younger, and whose sakhya-bhava has a hint of dasya packaged together with it. Kushamapita means, it means like a wreath that you would wear on your head, of flowers, a wreath of flowers that you would wear around your head or crowning the head. So he's a famous Gopa, and Vrindavan Das is identified with him. He's a disciple of Nityananda Prabhu. He has much to say about and praise for the Dwadasa Gopals, associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the principal associates. And with that, I'll just read here the one section of Caitanya-Bhagavata that I feel is very significant and important, because it is a section in which Vrindavan Das is revealing his heart. So Guhyam Akyati Prichati, Rupa Goswami says, this will foster our bhakti if we can conduct ourselves in such a way that great souls will reveal their hearts to us. So he's done so just out of his own inspiration. He's expressed his own inner aspiration in the course of his writing. And what could be more important in the book than that? While he may tell many things and many teachings and so forth, when he expresses his feelings, which is something confidential, it just happens to come out then certainly we should underscore that, highlight that, and take note of it. So through it, we see his bhava, if you will. I'll read it to you as I've translated it, and I'll go slowly so that the translators in Spanish and Polish can follow along. Vrindavana Das says, surrounded by his sishyas, Sri Sachinandan sat on the bank of the Ganga. If I had 1,000,000 mouths, I could not do justice to this beautiful sight. Nothing in the three worlds compares. Not the moon surrounded by stars, for the moon bears spots and waxes and wanes, while Prabhu Gaur is always full and spotless. Nor can we compare him to that scene. He says to Brihaspati, who is the guru of the gods, because Brihaspati is partial to the gods over the demons. Why can we not compare him? He says, this vision of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the bank of the Ganges to Brihaspati, because Prabhu Gaur, unlike Brihaspati, is equal to everyone. Nor can we compare him to Cupid, as some might suggest, who enters one's heart and causes agitation. Because when Prabhu Gaur enters one's heart, the agitation of samsara is destroyed and one's heart becomes happy. He goes on to say, as such, all these comparisons to that scene on the bank of the Ganga where Sachinandan is sitting with his sishas, all these comparisons are faulty. However, he continues, there is one fitting comparison that comes to mind. Just as Sri Nandakumar Krishna sat in the midst of the Gopas on the bank of the Jamuna, revealing his coward Leela, that same Krishna Chandra, in the form of a Brahman, enjoyed himself sitting amidst those same cowherd boys on the bank of the Ganga. Wow. He says, who can calculate the fortune of the lucky souls who saw this bliss? Again, as I said, he missed it. He never had the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's just telling what he heard from those who saw it. Just missed it by a few years, and he's so absorbed in what he heard that he's seeing it in his heart, and still longing to see it outside of his heart and be in such a leela. Who can calculate, he said, the fortune of the lucky souls who saw this bliss? Merely seeing one who has witnessed this scene and this bliss, that soul is freed from samsara. Because of my impiety, he continues, I did not take birth at that time, and hence I was cheated out of the joy of that darshan. What he's saying humbly is that by his karma, he cheated himself out of that opportunity. Of course, we don't see him quite like that, but this is his humility. Then he continues, O Gaur Chandra, show me your mercy that I may remember this Leela birth after birth wherever you and Nityananda perform pastimes with your coward companions, may I be present there in service. Vrindavana Dasa Thakura Mahashaya Ki Jai. So we cannot do justice to the contribution of Vrindavana Dasa Thakura, but by the request of Sumati and the desire of others, I've managed to say a few things I hope that you can appreciate and take advantage of his main contribution in the form of Caitanya-Bhagavata, Sri Caitanya-Bhagavata Ki Jai. So, questions?
Yeah. Okay. So
Other questions?
Yeah, Shamala has a question and she sent it.
Okay.
I don't think that she's present today. I think that's why she sent this to Archana. So I'm going to read. You can, I don't know if you can see it in the, oh no, you can't. Let me send it to you so you can also just see what it looks like. Because it's kind of long and it's not letting, Archana, can you copy and paste it and send it? Because it's not letting me copy and paste it. It's like 2 paragraphs.
Why don't we go on with another question in the meantime?
Oh, okay. Pranada?
I have 2 unrelated questions. The first one is it just bhakti that is carried over into one's next life? For instance, I'm thinking specifically of those who are practicing jnana or yoga, what they acquire or how they progress spiritually in this life, is that also carried over, or is it just bhakti that's carried over from life to life?
Well, the difference between them, of course, is that bhakti is a driven by nirguna, so it's transcendental, its influence, whereas karma is driven by rajaguna and gyan by sattva-guna. Now, if you do nishkam karma, you're kind of on the upper end of rajaguna and obviously prominently influenced by sattva-guna. But both of these influences, rajas and sattva, of course, are temporary. But nonetheless, all of the influences of rajas and tamas are temporary, but that doesn't mean that they don't carry over into the next life. Are they eternal? No. But obviously, impressions we receive in this life, influences of rajas, tamas, sattva, that we're under, will carry over in some way into our next life. But they're not eternal. That means they won't give us any standing in transcendence itself. Whereas bhakti also will carry over into the next life, like material influences, but it at the same time is eternal. And so it will carry with us into transcendence. So that's a way, I think, of thinking about that. So certainly, if someone has strong samskars for Gyan Marg in their next life, they're going to have those samskars as well. Or Rajagun influences and so forth. So that's the simple answer. Did you had a 2-part question? If you want to.
Yeah, the other one is unrelated. Someone said that Sridam, Srimati Radharani's brother, is not the same Sridam as Krishna's antahkarana. they can't be the same. And I don't know why, I didn't hear why that they couldn't be the same, but I'm wondering if you could weigh in on that comment.
Yes. So there are 4 gopas who are said to be identified with Krishna's antahkarana. So just like we have a subtle body made of material elements, Krishna's body is made up of spiritual elements, spiritual antahkarana in this case. So buddhi, ahankar, manas, chitta, these are all aspects of the subtle body. And there are 4 gopas close to Krishna who are identified with those aspects of the antahkarana. And in the Tantra, Gautamiya Tantra, I believe, that is mentioned. Jiva Swami cites it in his commentary on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Rupa Goswami's chapter on sakhya-bhava. Those 4, I think, are Dham, Sudam, Kinkini, and for the moment I forget. But a later author and sadhu, Nyanananda Thakur, who is in the lineage coming from Sudama Gopa in his Gaur Leela incarnation, wrote a famous book called Preya Bhakti Rasarnava. And he makes the point in his book that in the text of Gautamiya Tantra, the name Dham is used, but it really refers to Sridam. And for grammatical purposes, in terms of poetry of the text, Sridam is left off. The Shri, is left off, and just Dham is mentioned. But it doesn't refer to the Gopa named Dhamma, but to the Gopa named Sridam. This is his point, and he supports his point by underscoring the importance of Sridam. He is the most important Gopa in one sense. And he's the elder brother, of course, of Radharani. So he plays such a prominent role. His Gopa Bhav, his sakhya-bhava is Kewal, it's pure sakhya rasa. We could distinguish him from, or the Priyanarma Sakhas from him, and say they're more important, and Subal being among them is even more close to Krishna. But still, Sridam is given a very prominent place amongst all the Gopas. He's the Pitamarda of the Kaur Leelas. So Nyanananda Thakur reasons, well, Sudam, Sridam, they go together, and Sridam is, in his estimation, is it was like the cousin. He's the son of Ratnabal, who was the brother of Vrishabhanu, so he's from Barsana, and so forth. And he, along with Sridam, must be, Sudam is mentioned in the Tantra, but Sridam must be there, and Dham must not be the Gopa who's being referred to. This is his reasoning. Now, you have to take that kind of reasoning of his seriously. Although this isn't mentioned by the Goswamis in their text, neither are they in Sakhya-rasa. Whereas Nyanananda Thakur is, so there are going to be things about Sakhya-rasa that Nyanananda Thakur may say that while deferring as he does to Rupa Goswami's work, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Nonetheless, he's going to say things that are not going to be found per se in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. That's written by Rupa Goswami, who is in Madhurya Rasa, who takes himself out of that position, some extent to a neutral position, to write about the different rasas. Whereas Nyananda Thakur is in sakhya-bhava and writing about sakhya-bhava. So you have to take his comments seriously, and obviously it's an insight that he holds, that he was bold enough to write and has support from his community. Now I heard a fellow, a disciple of Narayan Maharaj, he actually argued about this point on our publication, The Harmonist. I think when Nyananda Thakur's point was raised, his point was probably what you're referring to. He was saying Sridham can't be one of those gopas because he's the older brother of Radharani. Somehow that made sense to him. But it didn't make any sense whatsoever to me. His idea was something like, well, these four boys are thought to be present in the Gopi Vastraharana Leela, where the gopis' clothes are being stolen. Therefore, Sridham, being the older brother of Radharani, couldn't possibly be there. It would be improper or something to that effect. That actually makes no sense. Of course, Vishwanath says the boys were very young. He's the older brother of Radharani. You could make an argument like that. This fellow didn't make that argument, but he's the older brother of Radharani. Radharani is there, and Vishwanath says the boys are very young. But so you could make that argument, but then again, it's not said in the Chanta that those were the four boys that were present there, on the one hand. On the other hand, what Vishwanath's really trying to say is that these boys were very innocent in their perspective with regard to this early romanticism of Radha and Krishna. So I haven't heard any argument that is of any substance that would counter what I feel is an insightful and feelingful point raised by Nyananda Thakur. Now you have to look at the grammar too that he's talking about, and see that if the syllable Sridam was added, Shri was added to Dam, what it would do to the text, and given that it does what he says it does, and which it must, otherwise why would bring it up, then you have further support. So I would follow the lead of Nyananda Thakur on that. Hope that helps. If you have any follow-up on that, I find it entertaining
So
that.
just to restate it, there's no reason why Sridam, who is one of the four of the antahkarana of Krishna, can't be Srimati Radharani's brother at the same time.
Why not? Sudam is her cousin. They're living in the same place. What would be the reason? Because he's an older brother that he couldn't be. Because he's the older brother, he couldn't. The point of these four being the antahkarana of Krishna is that they know everything about Krishna's pastimes. Jiva Goswami goes as far as to say, in one sense, they are narmasakas who are aware of all and participate in all of the romantic leelas of Krishna. Now, these gopas don't typically participate, but if they're the antahkarana, then they're there. Wherever Krishna's booty is, wherever his ahankara is, and so forth, well, theoretically, these boys are there. So Jiva Goswami, not anyone else, but Jiva Goswami says, actually, they're Narmasakas in that sense, although in their actual manifest form, they don't participate in those romantic leelas. So to have some objection to why Sridam could be aware of all of the pastimes of Radha and Krishna because he's the brother of Radharani, that doesn't make any sense.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So shall we go to Shamla's question here? She says, I'll read it. I guess some of you need to translate it into the local languages. In every Kali-yuga, Lord Krishna appears as Lord Chaitanya to preach the Yuga Dharma of Harinam Sankirtan. This religious function is executed merely by the Amsa avatar of the Supreme. Only once in the day of Brahma does the full manifestation of Swami Bhagavan, Shri Krishna, and Swami Bhagavan, Lord Chaitanya, come to the material world. Okay, so thought by some to be a Chaitanya avatar for every Kali Yuga. But once in a day of Brahma, Krishna comes in the Dwapara Yuga himself, and in the following Kali Yuga, he comes in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, imbued with the sentiments of Radha. So that's a special appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is non-different from Krishna. Then she goes on with her question. When Lord Krishna comes in Kali Yuga only to propagate the Yuga Dharma, she means to say Chaitanya. She said Krishna. When Chaitanya comes in Kali Yuga to propagate the Yuga Dharma, he's known as Gaura-Narayana. In this form, Lord Chaitanya or Gaura-Narayana does not distribute Braj Prem, Manjari Bhav, and so on. Wherever she has a quote, there is congregational chanting of the holy names of the Lord Gaura-Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In its incarnation, Lord Chaitanya appears and is worshipped by Sankirtan Yagya as per the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 4:30-36. And this question, quote unquote, is concluded with a sentence that says, excerpt from article of Madniti Swami. So there's no question here. I guess she wants us to discuss that, wants to maybe shed some light on that. I don't know what to say, but there are different persons, different acharyas who say different things about other yugas, other Kali yugas, with regard to the Yuga avatar. Some emphasize this point that Gaura-Narayana from Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha expression of Sri Chaitanya appears, propagates Nam Sankirtan, people chant, go to Vaikuntha. Would be the idea. Others have other opinions about what transpires with regards to the Yuga Dharma and any Yuga avatar in those Kali Yugas. You can get one opinion from Lochan Das Thakur, and maybe a different opinion from Vrindavana Das, and contemporary acharyas have said different things, but probably this is the most popular one, and Prabhupada is advocating it here, I guess, in his purport to the fourth canto that's being cited. So this is the normal, we should understand, this is the normal course of events. That is what? That from Vaikuntha, avatars of Narayan come in the different yugas as yuga avatars, propagate the Yuga Dharma, which culminates in attaining mukti in Vaikuntha in a form of Dasya Bhakti or Shanta Bhakti. Let's say primarily Dasya Bhakti they're advocating. The point worth stressing here is this is the extraordinary therefore, of the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that has to come from Krishna himself, Krishna Prema Pradayate. If he's to give Krishna Prem, he has to have Krishna Prem. None of the other avatars of Narayan have Krishna Prem. Even Narayan doesn't have Krishna Prem. Prema Madhurya is one of the qualities of Krishna that, one of the four qualities of Krishna that Narayan does not possess. So if someone is going to come and give Krishna Prem, an avatar, it's going to have to be Krishna himself, avatari. That is our Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he's giving a special dispensation which overrides the ordinary dispensation of attaining mukti and going to Vaikuntha and opening the doors thereby to a possibility within the Paraviyam, within the spiritual world, that even the inhabitants of Vaikuntha don't know about. We see that when Gopakumar in Bhagavatamrita went to Vaikuntha, the inhabitants there, for the most part, didn't know about Goloka and its nature and so forth and so on. They gave him instructions how to act in Vaikuntha, and he was compelled by his sakhya-bhava, which isn't a bhava in Vaikuntha, even though Narayan entertained it to some extent with him. The inhabitants was clear, they didn't understand what is Goloka. And this is mentioned in our texts, Gaudiya texts, that this is unknown even in Vaikuntha. So it's a very, very special dispensation to give the bhavas of Goloka, which are four, and particularly Madhurya, a particular type of Madhurya rasa, and sakhya-bhava through Gaur and Nityananda Prabhu. So very special time. Otherwise, Gaura-Narayana would be a Vaidhi Bhakti avatar of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, teaching Nam Sankirtan. That Nam Sankirtan is not empowered by the bhava of that Krishna's of Golok, that Krishna's pursuing, to taste himself from the vantage point of his best devotee. So his chanting is backed by that. Nam Shreshtam, the highest conception of the name. We call it Paraka Nam rather than Taraka. Taraka means, Taraka Nam means to cross over. So it means for mukti. Paraka Nam means something more, attaining more than mukti. So prem prayoja, the goal of prem. So this is the teaching. Another question?
Yeah, Padmanabha Swami has some questions from the Spanish-speaking devotees.
All right. Yes. Well, we shared this morning the heart, as he expressed it himself, of Vrindavana Dasa Thakura. And he's writing from the vantage point of Sakhya-rasa. So in one sense, overall, the book could be emphasized. That said, the way in which Vrindavana Das has written about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu in Caitanya-Bhagavata is fueled by that in one sense, but also by a general desire to broadcast in a more broad way the divinity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. So it's not a book that focuses per se on Sakhya-rasa. But one of the things that it does in that regard is it gives so much deference to an emphasis on and discussion of Nityananda Prabhu's activities, leelas, and so forth. More so than Caitanya-caritamrta. So that one could be drawn through the enthusiasm and discipleship of Vrindavana Das who's a disciple of Nityananda Prabhu, to Nityananda Prabhu, who's the fountain of Sakhya-rasa. So in that way, it may be helpful. But Caitanya-caritamrta is a focused book that in which the focus is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna and Radha combined, and a form in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is tasting and experiencing the bhava of Radha. That it's very focused in that way. So it is focused, it is a more bhava-focused book, I should say, than Caitanya-Bhagavata, but its focused is Madhurya Rasa. So what we read in Caitanya-Bhagavata, which is Caitanya-caritamrta, if your focus is Sakhya-rasa, I don't think that there's anything I can cite per se, other than one thing which comes to mind, which I'll bring up, that where this section he's focusing on sakhya-bhava. He's not really doing that in the book, but in a very endearing section for those who have that ideal of sakhya-rasa, is, or it has always been to me, is where in the 5th chapter of the Adi Leela, Vrindavana Das reveals his inner experience of Nityananda Prabhu coming into his life and blessing him such that he got entrance into Vrindavan, where ultimately he was blessed to write Caitanya-caritamrta. So the powerful influence of Nityananda Prabhu and how important he was in the life of Krishnadas Kaviraj. We really would be accurate to say that without Nityananda Prabhu, we wouldn't have Caitanya-Bhagavata. Without Nityananda Prabhu, we wouldn't have Caitanya-caritamrta. So that said, that doesn't mean if we have an affinity for sakhya-bhava, we shouldn't read Caitanya-caritamrta. Certainly, we should. It's all about Krishna. And sakhya-bhava is all about also loving Krishna. It's more about Krishna's romantic life, but what we see in our sampradaya largely over the centuries is that the sakhya-rasa that is pursued by some tends to be sakhya-rasa that is augmented by Madhurya Rasa. And so, as it's called, Dharma sakhya-bhava. So, Sakhya Rasa that is very much involved in Madhurya Rasa. So you can look at it in that way to hone some sensibilities about affinity for Madhurya Rasa as a Sakha. If you're going to help Krishna and serve Radha also with regard to their romantic plight, you better know something about it. So it's good for that. It's saying so much about who Krishna is. How can that not be relevant to a Sakha? But then there are other texts, of course, that are entirely focused on Sakhya Rasa. There's a book called Circle of Friends that's going to be published soon that will be helpful in this regard. So comparatively, there is a dearth with regard to this type of literature. I mentioned Nayanananda Thakur's book, Preyo Bhakti Rasarnava. That is another book that's focused entirely on Sakhya Rasa. But it's one of the reasons I'm writing this book at the request of others, because there are many devotees who have that affinity. You can understand that due to the campaign of my Guru Maharaj, who was driven by that bhava. Many people have that impressions for that. And so to support that, to give some support to that, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. So be a little patient when that comes out, and then you can read that. Another question?
Yeah, also from Padmanabha Swami.
And yes, I will repeat the question in English because Maharaj is saying it in English. Listening devotees can't hear the question. Sorry for that. I didn't. Last question. Yes, what's the question? Okay. Before I repeat the question, I see there's a little bit of a follow-up. Sakirati and Shamananda asked, are there certain sections of those, for those who desire Sakya that you recommend? Right. I see. I should mention there that also there's a whole chapter on Sakya Rasa in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And that would be the third chapter of the third section. Goes into quite a bit of detail about Sakya Rasa, different types of friends, what are their anubhavs, their sattvika bhavs, sanchari bhavs, so on and so forth. So it's a long chapter, but that's something given to us by Rupa Goswami. Regarding the question, how was the question? The next question is how to overcome fear. Well, you have to conquer fear. Fear is basically fear of death, and then I would say subcategories of that. Fear that I may not exist if I don't do something. I'm threatened. I feel that my sense of existence is threatened. And you're right, it is. So it's your sense of existence and what you are is the problem, because that sense of self cannot be maintained. It's here today, it'll be gone tomorrow. So therefore we teach that you have an identity as an Atma that transcends these psychophysiological sense of self, the body-mind sense of self, that is built out of attachment to temporary things, and so it's fragile. It's built out of things that are temporary, so the composite of that is it's also temporary. And so to become grounded in the fact that you're eternal through a good spiritual education, and then applying that education in practice, one will get experience of one's eternal. I would say that's kind of the beginning of spiritual experience, that I'm eternal. What can I say about that? If I say I've experienced that I'm eternal, someone could say, well, how can you prove that? I mean, I can't prove that. I mean, and what more can I say about it? Try it, and you have the experience, and then you know that there's nothing to fear ultimately. And you have to gravitate back towards that experience. As much as you get away from it, as much as you're getting away from the kind of practice that fosters it. And when it becomes predominant, and one's practice is now called nishta rather than anishta, which is steady, then you'll be fearless. But I mean, you can't just, put a bumper sticker on and say no fear, and jump from building to building or something like that, as people do sometimes. But I mean, obviously it plays out, as I say, in so many subcategories. I'm afraid to go to a social gathering because I might say the wrong thing, or people might think of me like this or that, all this kind of crazy fears, anxieties that we have. I mean, it's just all obviously really just a result of our material conditioning. And Gaudiya Vaishnavism is giving a comprehensive solution to that. But if you want a comprehensive solution, you have to have, you have to have a comprehensive approach to that solution, to fully embracing it. To the extent that we don't do that, well, our life is going to be pervaded by fear. Fear is what pervades material existence as an experience more than anything else. And there's good reason for it. So again, first thing is to become fully rational. Understand the reasoning behind fear. That can help. Now, understanding the reasoning behind fear is like understanding the reasoning about your own psychological dysfunction. That doesn't make it go away necessarily. I can point out to you, or a psychologist could point out to you, the reasoning for why you act the way you do that is problematic for yourself and is psychologically dysfunctional. But it's coming from from feelings that you've had, for example, in your childhood, let's say, that you experienced. And so how are you going to overcome them? Not just by the reasoning, but that's helpful. Now you have to take that reasoning and you have to integrate it into your life, and through some type of emotional exercise, you have to overcome that, feel your way through it, so to speak, that psychological dysfunction. So similarly with fear, I'm saying you have to understand the rationale behind it, and that can help, but only as much as you apply that rationale in the form of trans-rational practices of sadhana bhakti, hearing, chanting, which gives you then experience, again, that, well, you don't die, you're beautiful, more beautiful than you could ever be by whatever haircut you have or whatever outfit you wear, and so forth. And by that experience, then fear is overcome. So. All right, so I don't know if we got to all the questions, probably not, but
We got through 5. That's how many there were.
okay. There may be
That's
some
good.
others that come up in the course of the discussion, but we could save them till next week.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Nice to be with all of you. Hare Krishna.
Well, So before everyone goes, I'm going to make some announcements as I do. Okay, so I was just going to announce the classes. So June's class schedule. Wait, I'm just zooming in on my computer as I read it. Okay, so on Mondays, Padmanabha Swami is giving classes on the Brahmara Gita, the Song of the Bumblebee. And then on Tuesdays, Agni Dev is giving classes, Gaudiya Kirtan, Grasping the Essence of Devotional Hymns. And then on Wednesdays, Dulal is giving classes on Krishna Sandarbha. And then on Thursdays, Archana is doing interviews, the beauty and the messiness of a sadhaka's journey, interviews with modern day sages. And then on Fridays, Madan Mohan Das is giving classes, refining our desire, selected topics from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And then on Saturdays, Chitta is giving classes, Madhavendra Puri and Madhavendra Puri and the qualities of a devotee. And then we're back here on Sunday. I think those are all the announcements, right, Archana? Just the classes. I think I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay. So thank you, everyone. I will see you soon. Okay, Haribo.